These days in energy, it feels like every week is a year. So today on Friday, we've decided here at CSIS to host a short session with our colleague and senior advisor, Kevin Book, my friend here, to talk a little bit about some of the data that should inform how people think about the energy issues of the day, over the weekend, and going into the next week. Kevin, welcome to this new format at CSIS. I'm so glad you're able to join us.
Joseph, it's great to be here. We can talk about other things too, right?
Anything you want to talk about. We've got, there are hostages.
Well, we'll do our best to treat them well. A lot of things have been happening lately.
Totally. I mean, we started the week with a war between Israel and Iran, U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, and any time ordnance flies near the Middle East, oil people start reminding us that through the Strait of Hormuz, 20% of the global oil supply flows every day. One of the most remarkable things about the past week is, while there was a market response, it wasn't necessarily as large in a dollar amount as many people thought it might be. What was your read on that situation?
Well, if you were expecting $100 barrels, then I suppose you might have been disappointed. But if you look at how sleepy the market's been lately, that's a market that couldn't get out of bed for anything less than this. And what did we get? We got $13 a barrel of upside to the Brent price, to the crude price the world uses. That's a lot. That's a lot for the way this market has reacted to a lot of big risks that have shown up over the last few years. But then what happened? At the first sign that risk was abating, it darted back to the downside, plummeted. And why? Well, pretty oversupplied market relative to demand right now, and very significant downward bias in traders' minds. So look, I mean, a lot of us, I think, have been talking about these kinds of geopolitical risks for decades, and they've all started to happen. It's looking like a pretty risky time, but fool me once. This is a market that's looked at the geopolitical wolf and said, yeah, show me the disruption this time.
Well, and this is actually, I think, a really important issue because already you get a sense of victory from leadership here in Washington. Oil prices are down. We can leave aside the national security concerns, but the market impacts seem to have abated. And yet, is that going to be true for the American consumer? This is the big question, right? One of the things that constrains U.S. foreign policy is sensitivity to energy prices here at home. You've done some of the best work looking at how global oil prices project into the fuel prices that Americans pay. We were able to pull up a little data using this new format, and quick shout out to our colleagues here at CSIS who've created this for us.
Thumbs up.
Maybe you can walk the audience through how the American consumer is going to feel the risks that markets felt temporarily and have now abated in global markets.
Well, Joseph, let me ask you something. When's the last time you bought a barrel of oil?
I don't think I ever have.
Not? No? Didn't put oil in your car this week?
Virtually, yes.
Did you put gasoline in your car this week? Do you have a gasoline-powered car?
I have a gasoline-powered car. I don't know that I've fielded this week, but I probably will this weekend.
Were you worried? Did you have fears that maybe the gasoline price was going to rise precipitously? Did you rush to the service station in fear that you would get the last cheap barrel, last cheap gallon?
At Costco last weekend, I looked at the line. Pump prices were below $3 a gallon, and I decided with 3/4 of a tank, I would probably be okay.
So a couple of things. So first, our price sensitivity on the gasoline pump basis and the oil price in the global market are different things.
Yes.
There's a lot of steps. Information moves at the speed of light, right? So news changes markets that trade financially, electronically, right away. But barrels on the open sea move at 14 knots. The value chain, there's a lag. So prices in the crude market, which if you look at this trend line, you're looking at the crude price in gallons, not barrels. So, and we're looking at the difference relative to June 8th, which was before things started to heat up risk-wise on the global stage, before the Israeli attacks on Iran, but as the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, was starting through the process of censure, which took us down this road to war. And you see the crude price, the blue line, trending up to what would become 29 cents a gallon if you divide the barrels by 42. Magic number here, there are 42 gallons in a barrel. So those watching at home, that's the sophisticated math we're doing here. I know it may on a Friday be a bit much, but trust me, even we can do it on Friday after a big Thursday night out. So we see the gasoline price moving actually relatively little over the first few days. Again, that's the latency in the system. And then starting to rise. But then as we get to the point where the price plummets, the crude price reverts back to the downside.
So traders go here, all right, conflict over, ceasefire declared, immediately the risk premium.
War's
around
over,
the
all
Strait's
is well.
over.
We've got other things to think about. What's on
Right.
TV now? Short attention spans and markets live in the same zip code.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. We want responsive markets. But then, of course, the gasoline price more or less stays the same. It sort of gets up to about 11 cents a gallon in Delta to June 8th, and then comes back down to where it is today, about 9 cents. Meanwhile, the crude price is only 4 cents. Now, this is, in many ways, there are two things going on that are worth discussing. One is that there is a disconnect, and I love a good disconnect. What makes for a better chart than a disconnect? But then there's also the question of what happens to those gasoline prices. And we started this whole process off at the start of conflict with gasoline prices that were essentially flat versus inauguration. So the president had already avoided the 30 to 40 cent run up in gasoline prices, which is typically a function of seasonal blends changing for gasoline environmental rules, for volatility reasons, more expensive components in summer gasoline. Didn't happen, things were flat, and only 10 cents, 11 cents of upside travel, and now we're trending back down. Right. So this is, for the consumer, not a very big deal, and it's on top of actually a relatively benign environment for the summer driving season.
So as we look forward, this conflict is temporarily over. We have a ceasefire. We don't know that it's fully resolved. The next time, should it happen, that we see global oil prices rise on geopolitical risk, we should bear in mind that that signal arrives a little bit more slowly for the American consumer and then persists a little bit longer.
It does. The term of art you sometimes hear is up like a rocket, down like a feather, the rocket feather phenomenon. We can come back to rockets and feathers as the summer wears on.
So next time I'm at the Costco with just for my own personal behavior, the next time I'm at the Costco with a geopolitical event happening at on the same weekend, I should fuel up to avoid that going up.
Well, it is not our role to make public policy recommendations at Clearview, but I would suggest that if everyone did that, the gasoline price would probably rise more swiftly and shortages might come sooner. So maybe taking the price signals that you get from your retailer and not overreacting is the best possible thing. Telling people to do that ahead of crises or during them almost never works.
There you go. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Now, as we are talking this morning, there's ongoing negotiations on Capitol Hill about the one big beautiful bill.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We talked about a 12-day war at $10 a barrel, call it, and 100 million barrel per day market. That was really only a $12 billion thing. Now, of course, the multiplier effects of that crisis could have been hundreds of billions of dollars of effects, and it could have gone on longer. And now we're talking about $500 billion in tax credits for clean energy, which seems like a much bigger thing if you look at the dollars. And of course, that's over 10 years, the way the Joint Committee on Taxation scores it. Do you read through JCT scores? Is that something you do?
Unfortunately, that is something I do, yes. It's part of my job.
And when you look at the JCT scores, do you ever wonder, how do they get that number?
Yes, I sometimes do. I puzzle both on the overall and on the details.
I spend time wondering also, but I also am very glad for those numbers, because when you're trying to compare versions of bills, it's sometimes very difficult. I'm not personally a tax lawyer. In fact, no one on our team is. And so it's helpful to see whether the numbers are higher or lower in different versions of legislation. And then you can sort of gauge, did something change that is tighter or looser in terms of policy? And so if you look at the top line numbers on a net basis, the Senate finance draft as of June 23rd, which is the latest that we've gotten from the Joint Committee on Taxation. As we're standing here today, it may be changing. It's probably changing right now.
Hasn't been released as the moment we started.
No, okay, so we're still current.
Yes.
Good. And things happen fast right now, so we may not be current for long. But as of then, June 23rd, we had $476 billion over 10 in net reductions, counting the new outlays. It actually raised a little less and spent a little more. And so one of the ways to think about this isn't to go line by line, although that's very useful, but to sort of bucket and ask, what did the Congress focus on? Where did they want to raise the most money by rolling back? And if you look at the far left, all the way down on your side of the screen there, biofuels, clean fuels, actually got net outlays, and the Senate gave more than the House did in a net outlay basis. What they did is they were less stringent on the feedstocks, essentially, that they were, and they allowed for transferability of the credits that the House did not. And so you had a more lenient package that showed the same extension, but raising or costing more money over a 10-year interval in foregone tax receipts.
Right.
So a more significant give from the Senate than from the House. Don't know how that'll turn out. But interesting, the farmers, well, look, I would never bet against the farmers when it comes to energy policy here in the United States.
Neither would I.
No, yeah, I wouldn't either. Clean power.
However,
yeah.
clean power.
Well, it's a big number no matter how you slice it. And
Yeah.
the Senate put a little bit more runway into the credits, but it's still a very, very big number.
Yep.
You think that's going to change?
I think we're gonna, everything I'm hearing is that we'll end up somewhere in between the two. Now, in terms of absolute outlay, the difference might look kind of negligible, right? $270, $281 billion of fewer tax credits than were already planned. It's really going to be the shape of those. How much of this is going into clean, firm nuclear, and how long are those credits going to be available versus how many months of runway do wind and solar projects have to get into operation. There's a hot debate. I think social media says it was going on last night about how Congress is going to set these boundaries.
Yeah.
And so I don't actually know how they're going to fall, to be completely honest.
I think we're all waiting to see. But one of the things we've done here is we've grouped them all together,
Right.
which obscures a little bit some of the gives for nuclear relative to some of the takes from wind and solar. But of course, the net result is still, $250 billion plus being raised by foreshortening those credit lifetimes, by changing those credit properties.
One of the things that's most incredible to me about these numbers, Kevin, is in either of these cases, the tax credits do exist till the end of this year, for the next couple years, for novel clean firm technologies, even into the next decade.
Yes.
And you're talking about $280, $270 billion of savings. That's not far off from the original score of these tax credits when they were created from the IRA.
Well, it's not that far off, but one of the things about the original IRA is that the 10-year window was earlier in the maturity and the deployment of the technology.
Right.
And the 10-year window slides into a more mature phase. You get a bigger raise from the rollback. And so it isn't that far off in what they're taking back, but that's after several years of giving out, and it's actually still not extinguishing it entirely. So if we were to look at, say, the 2028 to 2037 window, the rescission would probably be worth even more on paper.
Yeah. Let's talk about two other differences that I see on this chart. One is on the future clean.
Yeah.
So this is a place where we've seen relatively consistent bipartisan support for manufacturing.
Yes.
Lots of policymakers want to see manufacturing come back to the United States. And in this one of the arguments underlying the political theory of change for the IRA was by spreading out the benefits of this new green economy,
Yes.
we'll buy longer term political support. Are we seeing that in these figures here?
No, no, we're not. And again, because we've bucketed this future clean bucket together, we're obscuring the fact that 45X is getting very substantially rolled back. The advanced manufacturing production credit is getting rolled back in both bills. The
Yeah.
Senate's raising even a little bit more on paper than the House is. And so, no, there are some leniencies in the Senate version of the text relative to the House. But no, it shows this desire to end the Green New Deal. And this is being considered a Green New Deal credit
Right.
by the Republicans in the House and Senate. And in spite of the red districts and the red states where these projects are being invested and made. And so one of the other things, though, in that bucket that I think is very important is that bucket includes the 45Q carbon capture credit.
Right.
And one of the most significant changes between the House version and the Senate version is that the Senate version spends money on 45Q, whereas the House version raises money from 45Q. So it's actually raised the credit value for enhanced oil recovery in the 45Q version that came out of the Senate Finance Committee, which is more generous than the status quo is right now. That is I think, a surprise relative to where things stood, but maybe not, because again, among the bipartisan support credits, there has been a lot of bipartisan support for carbon capture.
And then the place where there is very little debate and a marginal difference, you have the clean vehicles tax credits.
Yes.
Longstanding Republican opposition to subsidies for electric vehicles. Interestingly, Elon Musk came to town, is a big participant in Republican politics and Republican thought leadership around the shape and nature of government.
Yeah.
And yet, it changed congressional opinion very little on electric vehicles, apparently.
You could argue that sort of what he contributed to the campaign cycle and what's being taken out of electric vehicles are approximately the same magnitude, maybe a slightly different decimal place.
Right.
But it's not a number that you would want to see if you were in the electric vehicles business. And it also, I think, has to do with the partisanship that came into electric vehicles when they stopped being a technology for diversification and energy security, as they were when the 30D credit was created in the 2008 Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, and became a credit for decarbonization.
Right.
And really for sort of green job creation. And to the extent that that polarized the issue, and also energy security became less of a concern as we became a net exporter, and then suddenly this credit became all about the green aspects of it rather than the energy security aspects of it.
What's your read on the stakes of this debate? So we expect to see text come out of the Senate, maybe today, maybe over the weekend. It's very clear that the House is going to try and pass something before July 4th, meaning there might not be a lot of changes between the Senate bill and whatever the House does. But we think about what this is going to mean for the country, what it's going to mean for our power system going forward. What do you think? What are the things you're watching for in terms of what's the real impact here, right? So my views, EVs are, there's going to be a big difference in outlays here, but the literature on how effective these tax credits are at actually changing consumer behavior makes you think that this might have less of an impact over time than it otherwise would. But there were important critical minerals aspects where the sort of where the lithium, where the cathode materials are going to come from that we lose in ablating these tax credits.
So what you're saying is that the demand pull from vehicles could have helped the supply push for minerals.
I've always thought about that credit less as something which was about deploying electric vehicles in the United States, because the literature tells you they're just not as effective as the environmental lobby would like them to be for that purpose. But the way they were designed so that you could create I always thought of it as a gamble, that this was a bet worth a couple $100 billion to build an ex-China supply chain for electric vehicles.
Well, okay, that's a pretty big bet to be making on what started out as sort of second cars for one percenters until this credit got means tested, and then the 45W. The commercial clean vehicle credit actually avoided the means test and the North American final assembly and all the provisions that were supposed to apply to the 30D credit. It's a bigger raise on paper, actually, 20 billion or so, 30 billion more on paper than the 30D credit, because it's still a lot of people who are buying really nice vehicles with support from Uncle Sam. But let me ask you about something. So you started with the clean power credit.
Yes.
And one of the arguments that we've been hearing from people who want to defend those clean power credits, the broader buckets, is that it's going to raise prices for end users if you roll this back. What about the risks to the supply when we're short power demand? Isn't this dangerous? We had kind of another event this week, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I mean, as we were navigating the geopolitical crisis and a short war, the 12-day war in the Middle East, as we were preparing for this, the East Coast had a severe heat wave which pushed grid operators into near emergency conditions. And we saw a lot of the same things that we typically see when this happens, right? Concerns that there's going to be loss of service. The Department of Energy was issuing temporary air quality waivers so we could keep generation of various kinds on board. Two things I thought were interesting both in the political dialogue and what actually happened in power markets. Markets did respond. PJM power prices Monday and Thursday reached into the several $1,000s. Normally you would cap them on a high demand day in the $1,000 range. They were up at $3,500 in a lot of places. Interestingly, the thing that I thought was most notable, PJM planning documents expect 2026, 2027 peak load to be 159 gigawatts. Load this week was 161 at peak. So when we're thinking about navigating a load growth environment in the electricity system for the next few years, even though this is a couple gigawatts and under 2% of the whole total, we're already surpassing what's in the planning documents 2 years before those planning documents are meant to be imposed or meant to take effect. And that is what leads you to this argument that these clean energy tax credits, even if you don't believe the sort of modeling study which tells you that pull the tax credit away and that will pass through the whole system to the consumer, the disruption that you may see over the next couple years as you completely scramble the fiscal environment for all these planned projects could actually, at a margin of 1 or 2%, cause some real problems. And you know, the second issue that we talked about, that we saw talked about a lot this week, as soon as the power system gets thin, everybody wants to talk about the generation sources they love most and why they're best under
Do you have a
these
generation
conditions.
source you love most?
I do enjoy the kinetic motion of falling water, but that's for a variety of personal preferences.
Soothing, yes. I fall asleep to it better.
No, I mean, I think I think we can make too much of that debate.
Yeah.
So PJM runs on a lot of firm generation from coal and from nuclear.
Yeah.
It uses a lot of natural gas. But when I was looking at the data from this week, when the system was at peak, that's right about the peak performance of solar in that area as well. And it doesn't provide 50%, but it provides 9%. And in a world where 1 or 2% matters, I think we need to recognize both the base and the edge as being incredibly useful for keeping the power system online.
That's the sort of thing that is cause for reflection, but this isn't the last bill to ever address energy policy in America, is it?
I suspect not.
No. So some of these things do get revisited, and if you go back to the time before the IRA, does anyone remember the time before the IRA? It wasn't that long ago, and it was typical for some credits to lapse.
Right.
In fact, the residential solar credit, the IGCs, to phase down from 30 to 26 to 22 and then gone. Actually, it looks a little familiar to what we're seeing coming out of the Senate. In that world, you have a couple of things that happen. One is you get more attention on Capitol Hill as credits are about to lapse. And sometimes lawmakers like that. It's collateral for bargains. Sometimes it's an opportunity for persuasion inside the politics of Washington. And the second thing is that when lapses are approaching, manufacturers can move more product, trying to get stuff in before the window closes.
Right.
That world is a little bit more volatile. It doesn't have the long-term certainty that was sought in the IRA, but it's not necessarily the end of a technology. It's not necessarily the end of transition. And I think if you ask, so is there an organic case to be made for solar? One of the organic cases that is made is that it can be deployed relatively quickly, assuming you can connect it to the grid.
Right.
And so it isn't just a question of the what, if you will, but the when.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, but the dad joke, it is a Friday, and we're trying to keep it lively.
Okay, so I completely hear you on the question of, like we're again going to be in a situation where like extending these tax credits. I do think Congress is trying to accomplish something here where we can exit from that conversation. Particularly the Senate bill, I interpret as trying to do that. Give it a little more runway and then say, these are now commercial technologies. We're going to continue to make public investment in these novel and innovative technologies, particularly advanced nuclear and geothermal, that are going to provide long-term grid stability and energy growth for the U.S. We'll see if they succeed. But this being Washington, there's always another tax package to deal with.
There always is.
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Colleagues joining online, do join the conversation, and we will see you again soon.